Hello and welcome to yet another program of the Jctr Corner. I'm your host Alice Maplanga and thank you for joining me on another episode of our program. Today on the program we are going to be looking at the cost of living in the country as well as talk about the Jctr's basic needs basket. And joining me today is Mr. Chanda Chileshe, who is the Jctr's Social and Economic Development Program Officer. Welcome to the program, Mr. Chanda.
Thank you very much, Alice.
So you're joining us on the program today to help us talk about the cost of living. But before we move on to that, maybe just help us understand what the Jctr's basic needs basket is. What is the basket? How and where is it conducted? And how can the people access it?
Okay, thank you very much. So the Jctr Basic Needs Basket is a tool that the organization has been using since the early 1990s. So it's been using it to measure the cost of living.
Okay.
So by cost of living, we look at the cost of food items and the cost of non-food items. So on food items, you would find items like mealie meal, you would find items like cooking oil, and then on non-food items, you would find items like electricity and water bills that households pay on a monthly basis. So it's basically a tool that we've been using to look at how the cost of living is trending. So if you look at where we've been conducting this survey here in Zambia, we are doing it in 16 towns all over Zambia. So for Lusaka, we actually have specific markets that we go to. Here in Lusaka, we are going to Chainda Market, we go to North Mid Market, we go to Material Market, we go to City Market, we go to Chauma Market, we also go to Kapwata Market. So when we go to these markets, we get the cost of the different foods and non-food items and come up with what we call the cost of living. And let me also mention to say, when we are doing the cost of living, we're actually doing it for a family of 5.
Okay.
So we use 5 because that's the average number of households that has been given to us according to the Central Statistics Office. So in a nutshell, it's basically a tool that we use to measure the cost of the different food and non-food items on a monthly basis.
Okay, so you've talked about the fact that you treat it as an average expense rate for a family of 5. Does this average take into account the different variations that families may need? Perhaps a family with a lactating mother or a family with someone with diabetes, does it take all those variables into account?
Okay, so when you look at like the name itself suggests, the basic needs basket. So for this one, it's mainly looking at the basic items that the family should have in a month. So if we're talking about a lactating mother, maybe I should get the point where we revise the basket. Instead of having the basic needs basket, we now have what we are calling the basic needs and nutrition basket. So now this is where we incorporate issues to do with health, nutrition. So what sort of nutrition content are people or households receiving from the commodities that we measure or that we get during our survey on the market. So this is where now we're incorporating everyone, starting from children up to people of old age. So everyone is incorporated in the food items that we measure.
Okay, so how do you wish the Zambian people are able to use this basket?
Okay, the basic needs basket can be used for a number of things. Mainly can be used for budgeting, can also be used to monitor if government is implementing policies that are reducing poverty in our country. It can also be used for negotiating salaries for workers. So by budgeting, if you look at the items that we have on the basket, like I said, it's basic. So it's looking at the items that you need on a monthly basis. So whenever we release the basic needs basket, families will be able to know to say, in a month, this is the amount of money that I need in order to afford the cost of living or in order to afford basic food items. So it gives them information on how much food items are changing. For instance, if you are planning for the month of November and you know to say the price of mealie meal is 150, of course when you're coming up with a budget, you'll be able to refer the basic needs basket to come up with a budget that will allow you to afford what's there. And then the next thing is when it comes to issues to do with negotiation of salaries. So like I said, we use it to measure the cost of living. So if you look at the incomes that different people are getting at the end of the day, if you look at the statistics that we have according to the Living Conditions Monetary Survey for 2015, you would see that average incomes for workers in urban areas are around 3,500. And if you compare that to the cost of living, which is currently trending above 6,300, you'd see that there's that gap. So individuals and households now use the basic needs basket to say, cost of living is increasing, but our salaries are still remaining stagnant. So they use that as a tool to negotiate. And then they also use the basket to check if really government is putting up policies that will help to uplift people from their poverty levels. For instance, the government recently passed the Employment Act. So they can be able to measure to say, in the Employment Act, what is government proposing versus what is in the cost of living. So they use that to monitor and see really is government responding to the needs of the people.
Okay, so you also mentioned the fact that you've made a few changes to the basket itself. What are some of those changes and why have you made them?
Okay, so before 22nd of August, we used to have what we are calling the basic needs basket. But now we have what we are calling the basic needs and nutrition basket. So before we revised the basket, we are mainly looking at basic food items without really considering a strong component of nutrition.
Okay.
So maybe I should also mention to say the basic needs basket is not fixed. It changes according to the demands or needs or what's trending in society. So after looking at what was happening in society and seeing that Jctr is an institution that's there to promote human dignity, a need came out to say people are not living healthy lives. And one of the contributing factors was the food that they were consuming. So as Jctr, we sat down to say there is need for us to look at a basket that will promote nutrition.
Okay.
Yes, so to the basket, we added a more stronger component of nutrition. So we added food items like roller meal. So if you compare the two baskets, the old one and the new one, you would find that on the old basket, you would have breakfast mini meal. But on the new basket, you would have roller meal. On the old basket, we didn't have cassava mili meal. On the new basket, we have cassava mili meal. On the old basket, we didn't have fruits. But on the new basket, we have fruits. So in a sense, we are trying to ensure that we promote good health and good nutrition so that people can be able to live healthy lives. And in the end, they'll be able to live dignified lives, which is one of the things that we as an institution try to promote. Being a faith-based institution, we are guided by the principles of the Bible. And the Bible tells us that all human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. So if a human being is created in the image and likeness of God, that human being is supposed to live a dignified life. So how does one live a dignified life? By having access to a nutritious basket, by having access to the basic needs of life on a monthly basis.
Okay, so now you're talking about the inclusion of a more nutritious aspect and having, trying to promote people to have an uptake of more nutritious foods. What are you doing beyond the basket to try and promote a more healthy lifestyle for the people? Okay.
So beyond the basket, mainly the basket is the starting point. So whenever we get information from the basket, so in terms of trying to promote nutrition, we are trying to actually promote the availability and affordability of nutritious foods. So when we collect data on nutritious foods, for instance, the price of roller meal in the markets, the price of fruits in the markets, and we find that the prices of these nutritious foods are too high, Jctr now comes in to try and advocate to say these prices have to be at a price where everyone can afford, because this is basic. We need everyone in society to afford. So we advocate through maybe revision of policies, for instance, maybe empowering farmers to grow more fruits, to grow more cassava, so that we can have a huge supply of those commodities on the market so that people can live healthy lives. If you look at the trend mostly in urban areas, you would find that most people are not really consuming nutritious foods because they don't know where they are found, firstly. And if they find them, they would find that maybe they're expensive because the demand is low. So now that is where Jctr comes in to try and close that gap. And beyond that, we're also just educating people on the need of living healthy lives by eating nutritious foods.
Okay.
Yes.
So these changes that you've made to the basket, how has that affected the basket cost?
Okay. So if you look at the basket before we revised it and after we revised it, so before we revised the basket, the cost of living was around 5,300 kwacha. But after we revised the basket, it jumped to around 6,200. So you can say there is a huge increase of about 900 kwacha. So there were a number of reasons why there was that huge increase. Firstly, we added more commodities to the basket. Like I said, in the previous basket, we didn't have fruits, but in the new basket, we have fruits. In the previous basket, we didn't have vegetables like cabbage, we didn't have bondwe. In the previous basket, we only had we're only measuring one vegetable, but in this one, we are measuring 4 vegetables. So this is why you see that there's that increase. However, we can't say this is a bad thing, no. The reason why Jctr says this is a good thing is because we are trying to promote nutrition. And one thing that we have to bear in mind is that what the Jctr is doing is trying to promote the ideal situation, the way things should be, what human beings should consume. As I stated, we human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. So the ideal situation is that a human being who is living a dignified life should be consuming fruits, at least on a daily basis. This is according to nutrition experts. A human being who's living a dignified life should have access to mealie meal, should have access to cooking oil. So people come to say, they argue saying the cost of living is too high, but that's the ideal situation. That's how things should be. So you would see that there's that increase in the cost of living. However, even if with the revision there was that increase, we still feel there are some areas where we are lacking as a country, which has led us to be in this state that we've found ourselves in. So maybe I can also expand
on those areas. I mean, what are the areas that we are lacking?
So if you look at the policies that we have a number of policies, for instance, in the agriculture sector. So from our survey, our analysis, we've discovered to say the policies are weak. We have policies, but they are weak. So I would give an example of the policy on the lifting and closing of maize ban. Yeah. So you would, the export ban, yeah. So you would find that government would come up with a policy to say, we've lifted the export of maize. People can now export maize freely. And then later on, you would find that they close that without really looking at the different factors that will affect the price of mealie meal locally. So I'll give an example of what happened, that should be early this year. So without really doing much research, I can say, the government lifted the export ban of maize. So they allowed people to start exporting maize out of our country. So what that led to was that we had shortage of maize
on the local market.
On the local market, which affected the price of maize and mealie meal locally. So we notice using the survey that we conduct that the price of mealie meal shot for a 25 kg bag, it shot from around 90 kwacha to somewhere 140, 150, all because the supply locally reduced. So that had an effect on the cost of living. So the policies really have been affecting how the cost of living has been trending in our country. Also, if we look at the fish ban that we have towards the end of the year, and it goes into the beginning of the year, so it starts around November and ends somewhere in March. So you'd find that during that period, the supply of commodities like carpenter and fish on the market, local market, reduce, which induces the price of those commodities to increase, which again affects the cost of living. So if we have a policy that would ensure that even if there is that fish ban, we would still have enough fish on the market to stabilize the prices. So this can be done maybe by having policies that will promote fish farming, especially among the private sector. So you'd find that we are really dependent on the major lakes that we have. So once those are closed, it becomes a problem for us. So as a way of addressing those challenges, there is need to have policies that will promote or ensure that even the private sector join in, go into fish farming, so that whenever there's a fish ban, we can still have alternatives on where to look to.
Okay, so besides policies and policy implementation, what are some of the causes that you would attribute to the continued rise of the cost of living in the country?
Okay, so if you look at the current situation that we are in terms of the load shedding we are facing, so you'd agree with me that some parts of the country are facing more than 15 hours of load shedding, of having no power. So this is really affecting us because electricity is a major factor of production. So if, for instance, we take an example of millers, those for them to produce milling meal, they highly depend on electricity because they need electricity to do the production. So if they don't have electricity for more than 15 hours, it becomes costly for them to produce their milling meal because they have to look for alternative sources of energy in order to continue producing that milling meal. So by alternative sources of energy, they'll start using maybe energy sources like a generator or the solar panel. And you agree with me that using a generator, especially for a large-scale business, is very costly because you need to be buying fuel for the generator. And if you look at the prices of fuel at the moment, they are very high. So you find that they're incurring a lot of costs when they are producing these food items. So in order for them to continue surviving in the market, in order for their business to continue thriving, they have to push that cost to the consumers. So that cost is pushed to consumers by increasing the prices of the food items that they are producing, which is affecting the consumer at the end of the day. So if a consumer can't afford milling meal, like it stands currently, you would find that milling meal is at 140 kwacha, 150 kwacha. Households are failing to afford that, which is causing hunger in households. People are failing to have 3 meals a day, which is affecting them negatively and preventing them from living dignified lives. Yes, and then the other reason which we've seen is causing the high cost of living is the issue of climate change. So if you look at our situation now, today is like the 12th of November. Lusaka hasn't received much rain yet. Maybe in some parts of Lusaka there have been some showers, but mostly we haven't received anything. So that is affecting our agriculture sector in the sense that farmers are not able to produce as much as they could maybe 5 years ago when we used to have enough rains. So we've seen that climate change is also really affecting the cost of living, because if farmers are not able to produce enough maize, again, it all goes back to the issue of demand and supply.
And demand,
yes. So if we don't have enough crops in supply on the market, you would find that the price will still remain high because the demand is high. Zambia's population keeps growing, so more people need food. So if we find that the population is growing, but the yields that we are getting from the agriculture sector are reducing. This is why you find that now prices are going up and people are now failing to afford those prices.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to take a short break, but be sure to join us just after a few to hear Mr. Chandler talk us through more about the climatic changes and the effects that they're having on the cost of living. Okay. We'll be right back.
To advertise on this program and enjoy amazing introductory rates, please call us on +260 211 290959 or +260 211 290912 or +260 953 538 000 or send us an email at loyolazam@gmail.com.
All right, thank you for joining us. Now, before we went for break, we were hearing from Mr. Chandler, and he was talking to us about some of the effects that the climatic changes that we're seeing are having on the cost of living in the country. So you've spoken about the challenges in terms of the climate and also in the agriculture sector and how that climate has affected the agriculture sector. Is this the time, you think, for diversification in the agriculture sector as well as a shift away from our over-reliance on maize?
Definitely. This is a time for us to really diversify our agriculture sector. So like I mentioned, because of climate change, you would find that we are producing less than we used to produce in the past. Reason being, we're having less rainfall. So you'd find that most farmers are really complaining, especially in the production of maize, that is really dependent on the rains. Whenever there is less rainfall, you'd find that farmers who produce maize will be complaining to say the yield is going down because of the conditions of the weather. So now, moving forward, how do we address these challenges? If you look at diversification in the agriculture sector, I think this is something that we've been talking about for a country for a very long time.
Yes,
for a very, very long time. It's good to know that we as a country know the benefits that come with diversifying the agriculture sector. We know that if we diversify the agriculture sector, we'll be able to have different crops instead of just focusing on maize. We'll focus on other crops, for instance, rice, soybeans, cassava, even fruits. That's what comes with diversification of the agriculture sector. But unfortunately, it has really taken us time. And I should also mention to say that maize being the staple food for our country, you would find that whenever the price of mealie meal goes up, it also affects the prices of other commodities. You would find that if, just for instance, if you go to the market, if mealie meal goes up, those who sell maybe carpenter, you would find them complaining to say, the price of mealie meal has gone up. We also have to increase carpenter so that we are able to afford mealie meal, which should not be the case if we had diversified our agriculture sector. So moving forward, we really need to implement this and ensure that we diversify and look at many other crops. Zambia is a country that's blessed with a lot of land. Our weather conditions are good to grow many other crops apart from maize. So let's not focus too much on maize because this is killing us. This is why it's one of the reasons why we found ourselves in this situation. So let's look at other crops as well and see how best we can ensure that we stabilize the cost of living, which has really been going up for some time. And maybe beyond looking at diversifying the agriculture sector, we need to look at what farming methods are we using. So for a long time as a country, we've been using conventional farming methods. So under the conventional farming methods, you'll find that we've been using fertilizers, burning of trees. This is why you find the Jctr system. This again has actually contributed the issue that we are having with climate change. You would find that cutting down of trees has a negative impact to our environment.
On the carbon cycle.
Yes. So as Jctr now, this is where we've been partnering with experts from Kasisi Agriculture Training Center and the Ministry of Agriculture to try and promote sustainable organic farming. So this is a sustainable way of farming where you find that we are using nature to grow our crops. We don't have to rely on the use of fertilizers. We don't have to cut down our trees and burn them, but we just need to use what we have around us. You know, the thing that comes with burning down of trees, you would find that all the nutrients that are in the soil would be burnt.
Okay.
Yes. So that again has a negative effect on what you produce at the end of the day. So as Jctr, we've been trying to promote sustainable ways of farming because we believe it's actually economical in the sense that if you look at the price of fertilizer at the moment, you would find that a bag is above 200 kwacha. Most people are actually struggling and they're depending more on FISIP. So what happens to those who are not on the FISIP program? It means it will be difficult for them to grow these different crops. But if we go the sustainable organic agriculture way, they'll just use the things around them. For instance, leaves. If they want to grow maybe cabbages or vegetables or rape, they can just get leaves, power them up, put soil on top of that, and start watering that so that they make manure out of that. And then after that, they can start using that soil to plant whatever crops that they need.
Okay, so now you've spoken about the one method of sustainable organic agriculture. How do you think the Zambian people will take it to then have this whole shift from the way they've been doing their farming? And as you mentioned, we are very reliant on fertilizer and also some of the traditional methods of the Jctr system. How do you communicate the information of the fact that those practices are harming the environment? And then how do we then relay the information of some of the more sustainable methods?
Okay. Maybe let me mention to say, first, it's difficult for Zambians to really shift from a method that they've been using for a long time and moving to the organic agriculture. It's not something that's easy. So as a way to sensitize and advocate for policies that can promote sustainable organic agriculture in our country, like I said, we've been working with Kasisi, and then we've also been working with Ministry of Agriculture. So with Kasisi, we are working with farmers who are actually practicing sustainable organic agriculture. So with farmers, they actually have success stories because that's what they are practicing. So we get the actual farmers who are using that form of farming. So if you go to Kasisi, you would find that they even have pieces of land where they try to compare the sustainable organic agriculture and the conventional agriculture. So you would see the difference between the two and how plants from sustainable agriculture or organic agriculture would grow compared to the conventional one. So we've been using the farmers. And then with government, we've been trying by all means to advocate for policies that will favor or that will promote sustainable organic agriculture. Of course, it will take some time, but we've started doing the advocacy. We've also been working with universities just to try and advocate on the need to include sustainable farming methods in their syllabus. So we've been working with UNZA, we've been working with Chalimbana University, we've worked with Mulungushi University, we've also worked with the Zambia Catholic University. So it will take time, but bit by bit, we are making progress towards achieving that goal of where we shift from moving from the conventional one to the sustainable farming methods. And it should be something that should be taken seriously, because we are seeing the effects that have come with climate change. So if we continue using the conventional farming methods, we'll be affecting ourselves in the sense that, like I mentioned, cost of living will continue rising high, or it will remain high, because we won't be able to produce much yield in the agriculture sector.
Okay, so maybe one of the arguments one might give you is that they have more yield when they use fertilizer as compared to maybe if they were to use one of the organic methods. Is that something that is debatable, where you've seen more yields when people use organic methods?
That might be very possible. That might be very possible, where you'd find that someone who's using conventional yields more compared to the sustainable organic agriculture. So, but the thing that we have to focus on is what happens after you use the conventional farming practices. You're destroying the environment. You're cutting down trees. You're using fertilizer to put in the soil. So it becomes, in the long term, it becomes difficult for you to continue planting on the same field, because that field might not have the same nutrition content as it had previously. But compared to the one who's using a field where there is sustainable organic agriculture, you would find that their soil would keep on improving, because they are putting nutrients to that soil, just using nature without using fertilizers. So nature, as they are using nature, they will be putting more and more nutrients to the soil, which will be promoting them or allowing them to continue growing on that same piece of land. So it's basically about looking at what happens afterwards. How do you affect the environment with the farming system you're using?
Okay, so you've spoken to us about the cost of living and some of the reasons that we've seen the continued rise in the cost of living. What would be your recommendations to the government, but not only the government, the Zambian people as well, in addressing the cost of living and also weathering the storm through this period?
Okay. There are a number of recommendations that can be given to governments and the Zambian people at large. Firstly, if we look at the Zambian people, as Jctr, we feel there is need for us to have a mindset shift in the way we look at the agriculture sector. So you would find that most Zambians believe agriculture is really for, maybe since it's a dirty job, so most people don't want to associate themselves with that, which should not be the case. So as Jctr, what we are recommending to Zambian people is that we have to take agriculture as a major economic activity. Like I stated, if you look at the food items that are on the basic needs basket, you would find that most of them come from agriculture. So if people are avoiding to go into agriculture, it will become a challenge for us. We'll be failing to sustain ourselves, we'll be failing to produce enough food that will last us throughout the year. Recently, I think it's also the current situation. You'd see that in some parts of southern province, there's hunger. They don't have food. Mostly it's because of us not really taking agriculture as a major economic activity. So as Jctr, we are strongly urging all Zambians to ensure that they take agriculture as a major economic activity, not really by just maybe if we say agriculture, you should have a farm, even just a backyard garden would do. Like I explained, currently the cost of living is over 6,300. So if you have a backyard garden and you grow tomato, you grow rape, you grow onion, it means you won't have to spend money on buying these food commodities because you already have them. So you might spend that money on buying other commodities that are on the basic needs basket, which will help you to be meeting what you're supposed to be eating for the month. So we have to take agriculture as a major economic activity. And then secondly, there is need for government to have consistent policies. I mentioned the issue of doing with the export ban of maize. So government needs to put up a policy where they have to say, during this period, we'll lift the ban. Farmers will be allowed to export their maize out of the country. And during this period, we'll close the ban. Actually, this will be good because it will give farmers time to plan. They will know that during this period, let's export this. Because what happens is, when government just announces, you don't know when next they'll close the ban. So you'd find that most people would rush to go and sell as much as they can outside the country, which affects us in the end. So there is need for us to really have consistent policies that guide the agriculture sector. And then thirdly, if you look at governments recently enacted the new Employment Act, there is need for government to enforce that act. So you would find that we have a number of laws that guide us, but as a country, we are not really enforcing those laws. For instance, under the same Employment Act, there's a part on minimum wage. Minimum wage was revised, so from 550 to around 900 kwacha for all general workers. But if you go around, you would find that the Employment Act is not being followed. The Employment Act is not being enforced. So you'd find that people are still getting below the minimum wage. So now, how can we address such issues? This is where now government has to come in and ensure that these laws are enforced. How can government ensure that these laws are enforced? We have a Ministry of Labor. So we have to look at how much resources are we providing for that ministry. Are we providing enough resources, or do they need more? Or can the Ministry of Labor work with local councils to ensure that what's in the act or in the law is being enforced? So if they start enforcing what is in the Employment Act, you'd find that if people are getting above 900, of course they won't be able to meet the basic needs basket, but it will cushion them. They will be able to at least buy some of the items that are on the basic needs basket. So that's the goodness that comes with ensuring that they enforce these different laws that we have in our country. And then thirdly or fourthly, government has to ensure that they are creating employment opportunities for people out there. We all know that it becomes difficult for one or a household to afford the cost of living if they are not employed. Because what comes with employment is a guaranteed income at the end of the month. So you find that the employment rates at the moment are very high. So it's becoming very difficult for people or households to afford the cost of living because they have no source of income. So you'd find that they go maybe for 2 days without meals, or because they don't have sources of income. So government needs to try by all means to create employment opportunities. This can be done by creating a conducive environment where investors can come in, not just foreign investors, even local investors, where they can find a conducive environment where they can invest in and ensure that they employ more people. Yeah, so those are some of the things that have to be done in order to address the challenge of the high cost of living which we are facing as a country.
Okay, so thank you for all of that information, Mr. Chandachileshe, and thank you for being with us on the program.
You're welcome.
That is all the time we had for you today, but be sure to join us again next week, same time right here on Loyola TV. I'm your host, Alice Maplanga, and from me and the crew, it's goodbye.